I've always been the second choice in my parents' eyes. My brother, Craig, was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Growing up, it was always about him, how he aced his exams, got into a top college, and later became the youngest vice president at his company. My parents never hesitated to remind me of how far ahead he was, both in academics and career. If I wasn't keeping up, it was always my fault. But while Craig was climbing the corporate ladder, I was thinking outside the box. I never had the 9-to-5 ambition. Corporate life didn't appeal to me. I wanted to build something of my own, to be an entrepreneur. Ever since I first understood the concept, I knew that's the path I'd follow. 5 years ago, after working a variety of jobs and gaining experience in the industry, I took the leap and started my own business, designing modern, edgy car accessories. It wasn't a whim. I had a solid business model, a plan, and the passion to back it up. But when I told my parents about it, expecting at least some kind of support or advice, I was met with ridicule. They couldn't even hide their disappointment. It was right after they threw a party to celebrate Craig's promotion that I approached them with my plan. I told them about my new business venture, but they just laughed. They told me I was embarrassing myself, that after all the years of education and experience, this was the best I could come up with. They advised me to stay in my job, warned me that pursuing my business was a failure waiting to happen. When I insisted I would go ahead with it, they gave me an ultimatum: continue with my current job and not be a disgrace, or go after my dream and lose them for good. Their words hit hard, but they didn't break me. I chose to cut them out of my life and pursue my dream anyway. I didn't need their approval. I was determined to prove them wrong. I knew the car accessory business had potential, and I had faith in my idea. It wasn't easy. In the beginning, I lived hand to mouth, relying on word-of-mouth marketing and a lot of hustle to get the business off the ground. But things started to pick up. Within months, I attracted investors. A year and a half later, my business gained significant traction. Now, at 29, I'm living the life I always wanted. I've built my own success. I'm not a millionaire, but I'm financially comfortable, living in a nice apartment in a great neighborhood, driving the car I always dreamed of. My business is thriving, and I'm finally living life on my terms. And while I don't have the relationship with my parents that I once hoped for, I don't need their approval. I've proven to myself, and to them, that I'm not a failure. I don't need them to validate my success. I'm happy with where I am, and I'm proud of what I've built. It's been 5 years since I last spoke to my parents. In that time, I've built a life for myself. I married my girlfriend of 8 years, and we've been happily married for 2. Recently, we found out we're expecting a baby, adding another milestone to my life. Despite all these big moments, I never reached out to my parents. They knew where to find me. They could have easily asked any relative for my contact information. I'm sure they've kept up with my life through family, as they frequently ask about me, though they've never made an effort to reach out directly. I guess that's their way of dealing with things. But last week, they contacted me. They wanted to meet. I wasn't sure what to expect, but after discussing it with my wife, she encouraged me to go. They hadn't given any details in their message, so I wasn't sure what kind of conversation was coming, but I went. When I arrived at their house, they greeted me warmly. It felt off. They had never been this kind to me before, not even when I lived there. Even as we exchanged small talk, I could feel something was coming, and soon enough, they got to the point. They told me they'd heard about the success of my business and had invited me over to congratulate me. They didn't apologize for the way they'd treated me in the past, but they acknowledged that I'd proven them wrong and that their initial doubts had been put to rest. I was taken aback. There wasn't much for me to say, so I just smiled. Then, they told me about Craig. Apparently, in the last few months, his company had faced serious financial trouble, leading to mass layoffs. He was one of the many people let go, and now, after years of loyalty to the company, he found himself without work. My parents shared that he had been struggling to find a new job. He was too disheartened to apply anywhere else, and his job search had yielded no meaningful offers, most of which were beneath his previous position. It was clear they were worried about him. I found it strange that they were telling me all this, especially when there wasn't much I could do, but I let them continue, curious about where they were going with it. And then, finally, they asked. They wanted to know if I'd consider hiring Craig. He was too depressed to look for a job on his own, and they thought it would be a good opportunity for him to work with me, especially since his expertise could add value to my company. They asked if I could offer him a position. something that would pay well and help him get back on his feet. When they asked me that, I didn't know how to respond, so I told them I needed time to think it over and would give them my answer later. I didn't say yes right away because, honestly, I wasn't sure how to react. I should have expected they had an agenda when they reached out after all this time. They had the chance to contact me before but chose not to. They seemed pleased with themselves, like they expected me to say yes, but after I left and discussed it with my wife, I decided to decline. My wife works in a bank and isn't involved in my business, but she made it clear that this was my professional decision. If I didn't feel like I could work with Craig, then I should trust my instincts. She didn't think my parents had genuine intentions in reaching out to me. After all, they hadn't even apologized. I didn't owe them anything, especially since I had already helped them by keeping my business afloat. I didn't want to tell them no directly because I knew they would twist it into something personal. They'd probably try to paint me as the bad guy. So, I ignored their daily texts asking for my answer. But eventually, they called 2 days ago, demanding I give them a response. I told them after thinking it over that I simply couldn't work with Craig. We'd never had a good relationship, and there was no reason for me to hire him now. They lost it. They screamed at me about everything they had done for me, raising me, paying for everything as a child. They said I owed it to them to help out my brother. It felt like such an unfair thing to say. Of course they helped me when I was a kid. I depended on them. It wasn't some big favor. I wasn't turning my back on them. I just didn't want to work with Craig. I tried to explain it to them, but they wouldn't listen. They kept screaming, accusing me of holding on to old grudges, that I was being petty and refusing to help family. They said if the roles were reversed, Craig would have helped me out. They went on about how they would have supported me if my business hadn't worked out. I tried to keep my cool, but it became too much. Eventually, I told them I didn't want to speak to them anymore, hung up, and blocked their numbers. Since then, I've been feeling really conflicted. Part of me feels like they manipulated me, especially with the way they said they would have helped me, but another part of me feels guilty. I've talked to my wife about it, and she reassured me that they were just trying to manipulate me into doing what they wanted. They haven't even apologized, and yet they expect me to help out. My brother never treated me well growing up, and I don't owe them or him anything. Still, I can't shake this nagging guilt. AITA for refusing to hire my brother after he lost his job. Update 1. Thanks to everyone who responded to my post. It's been a while since I last spoke to my parents. Honestly, I know what I did wasn't such a big deal. It's not like Craig will never find a job again. It's just that I don't want to work with him, and after talking it over with my wife, we're both standing by our decision. But my parents are taking it way too hard. They've been going around telling relatives that I'm just jealous of Craig, that I've always been resentful of him. It's so childish. They're going out of their way to contact every relative, trying to make me look like the villain. I don't know why they're acting like this. It's honestly ridiculous. I've blocked them, and I'm not unblocking them. They can't manipulate me anymore. Some relatives who've reached out have sent me screenshots of what my parents are saying. I've explained the situation to them, and most of them understand. They know about the tension between us for years, so they're not siding with my parents. That gives me some peace of mind. I don't have time to focus on this right now. My wife's pregnant, and I'm focusing on that. We were planning on announcing it soon anyway, but I think I'll do it sooner to make a point. I just want my parents to stop bothering us. Update 2. We made the announcement about my wife's pregnancy on social media a couple of days ago. Since then, things have escalated. Most of our family congratulated us, but then I received an email from an unknown sender. The message said my child would suffer because of what I was doing to my family. It was obvious it was from my parents. I can't believe they would say something like that, especially before my child is even born. It's disturbing and hurtful. They haven't apologized for anything, and yet they still expect me to help Craig. He didn't even ask me directly for help. It's all my parents trying to get me to do something they want. I haven't told my wife about the email because I don't want to upset her, especially in the early stages of her pregnancy, but I'm so disappointed by their actions. I decided to visit them in person, since I didn't want to unblock them, but when I got there, they refused to even open the door. So, I stood outside their house and yelled at them. I told them they had no right to treat me this way, especially after everything they had done in the past. I'm done trying to keep the peace. They've crossed a line, and I don't know where we go from here. I had never really felt like I was part of the family, just someone who happened to be moderately successful. They never cared when I was struggling, and now, suddenly, They wanted a piece of my success. They wanted to bring my brother into the picture, too, even though they'd never stepped up to help me when I was down. Honestly, they didn't deserve to speak to me at all after how they'd treated me. So, I told them that whatever they were trying to do was only pushing me further away. I didn't want to talk to them anymore, and even if they apologized, I couldn't see myself forgiving them. They were never going to get any help from me when they retired, and I wasn't going to let them see my child either. After saying all that, I walked out and went home. I felt relieved. Honestly, I'd been holding all these emotions in for so long, but it felt good to finally give them the response they deserved. I didn't tell my wife about it yet, though. I didn't want to upset her, especially with the pregnancy, so I decided to keep it to myself until things settled down. Update 3. After the in-person confrontation with my parents last week, they went quiet for a while, and I thought maybe they'd finally let things go. I even hosted a pregnancy announcement party for close family and friends, expecting my parents to show up with some drama, but they didn't. It made me think they had moved on, and I was trying to do the same. But then, this morning, I got a call from Craig, which was completely unexpected since we hadn't spoken in years. I assumed he was calling to demand a job or to join in on my parents' campaign, so I ignored his first call, but he kept calling and even sent me a message saying it was urgent, that he just needed to talk. He assured me he wasn't asking for anything and just wanted to get something off his chest. So, I finally picked up. Turns out, he'd been dealing with some depression and hadn't been in touch with anyone, including our parents, for weeks. It was only recently that he checked his messages and saw how our parents had been pressuring me about giving him a job. He was confused because they hadn't mentioned any of this to him, even though he'd been talking to them regularly. After reading the messages, he suspected they were lying to him about their behavior, so he called me to find out the truth. I told him everything, how our parents had pushed me to hire him and how it had turned into harassment. I made sure he knew that I genuinely sympathized with his situation. I knew how much his job meant to him, and I could only imagine how hard it must have been to lose it. But at the same time, I wasn't willing to work with him because we had never gotten along. Craig seemed to understand. Surprisingly, he told me he wasn't interested in working with me either. He wasn't upset, just that he needed some time off, and that wasn't influenced by the situation with our parents. He'd actually been holding out on new job offers because he wanted to take a break. He said he'd been frustrated with how things had been handled, and he was planning to confront our parents. He apologized for everything that had happened, and I could tell he had matured a lot in the last few years. It was a good conversation. We didn't fix everything, but we made some progress, and I felt like he was starting to see things more clearly. Update 4. A couple of days after my talk with Craig, he confronted our parents about everything. As I expected, it didn't go well. My parents got defensive, insisting they were only trying to help him and that they didn't approve of his decision to take a break. Craig accused them of trying to control his life, which just set them off. They started listing all the things they'd done for him, as if those were favors, which only made things worse. I don't know why they always act like that. It's their job as parents to help, not something to brag about. Things got really heated, and now Craig isn't speaking to them anymore. And, of course, my parents are blaming me for it. I don't get how they keep turning every issue into something I'm at fault for. This time, they didn't confront me directly but instead posted something on Facebook about it. Thankfully, the rest of our family had my back. They called out my parents for trying to control both me and Craig, and for not supporting him during a tough time. After getting flooded with comments, my parents took the post down and blocked everyone. Now, they're completely isolated, and I couldn't be more relieved. As for Craig and me, he's apologized for his past behavior, and we've agreed to try and rebuild our relationship slowly. But right now, my focus is on my wife and our soon-to-be family. I'm really excited to be a father.